Against Women Act reauthorization bill that increases focus on addressing the needs of youth affected by domestic violence. While this is a start, the dialogue needs to continue. Based on what Mr. Conyers said, the fact that protective parents all across America, and there are hundreds, have exasperated all of their resources and justice known to civilians. We have had one Inter-American Commission on Human Rights report and recommendations, 4 congressional briefings, 1 Senate hearing, 1 briefing at DOJ, 1 comprehensive report by the DOJ on child abuse and domestic violence. Now is the time, the hour has come, for congressional oversight hearings of the corrupt judges, judicial process, and all the stakeholders involved. Just like the hearings held for the tobacco industry, our children and their future are worth more than a pack of cigarettes. It's time to act, and we must act now. Thank you, and God bless you.
Sometimes cases from other states, so I work with protective parents, mostly mothers, occasionally fathers, and so we have a first-hand, deep, in-depth insight as to what actually goes on in these cases. We provide emotional support. We help people find, when possible, pro bono services, whether for lower court cases, for appeals, and we often come in as amicus, via amicus briefs for appellate cases. And I hope that each of you will walk away with this editorial, because it is one of a series of editorials that the Washington Post editorial board has published in the last months. And I will really never forget the day in August, a little bit over a year ago, that I did a legal consult with an attorney and spoke with Hera McLeod. And she said on that August telephone call, with the kind of seriousness that you never forget, that I know my son is going to be killed by his father. She knew that. And to talk with someone who knows so deeply, out of that kind of knowledge that no one else can, you just cannot fake that, was shattering at that moment. And it was even, words can't describe what it was like in October to hear that her worst fear had actually happened. How can you not want things to be different after knowing this? I was going to talk a little bit about Gloria Faulkner's case in the Washington Post article. It's a horrible case if you read about this little boy being forced to have unsupervised overnight visits with a sex offender, a convicted sex offender, not only a convicted sex offender, but a Tier 3 registering for life sex offender. This little boy is showing horrific symptoms of sexual abuse that are being ignored. His mother is also being ignored. She's not seen as a credible person reporting this. She's seen as somebody who maybe there's something wrong with her. All the kinds of criticisms that you see directed against the mothers are directed against this woman. The great thing about her case is she still has her son. As you can hear, it's very easy for parents in this position to lose custody or even access, any access altogether to their children. In this case, there's a law in Maryland that says you've got to make a finding whether there's going to be future risk of abuse or not. If you read the court documents, there's very little to show that this actually happened, and that doesn't seem to trouble the court particularly. There are insinuations somehow this is all Gloria's fault. Well, you know, mothers make these terrible accusations. Maybe there's something mentally wrong with her. So her case, if you look at it, there are elements that apply to all the cases across the board. And when people ask me, tell me about your particular case, I can tell them almost to a pattern what's going to happen, what they'll be accused of, how the case may likely go, what to expect, because there is a pattern here. It's a very easily discernible pattern. And when you look at the research that Joy Silberg has done, you can see these patterns, and they're not just in a few cases, they're really across the country, in state after state after state. And one of the most troubling parts, and I'm hoping this doesn't happen in the case in the Washington Post, is that you can get a mental health professional come in to do an evaluation. And just like in the old dictatorships, you know, when you have got somebody who's a bit inconvenient and you want to either discredit them or get rid of them, you get them labeled insane or mad or somehow disordered, and you get them their credibility destroyed and impugned. And after credibility is gone, you have really no foot to stand on in your case. I wanted to jump to what this really looks like on the ground. This is a Maryland case. And so you have in Maryland this rising awareness through Gloria Faulkner's case, through Harris' case, through the murders of the 3 Castillo children back in 2008, and there have been other murders as well, and serious cases. For example, the father in Washington County who was refused custody of his child when the mother was marrying a convicted sex offender, pedophile. There are these cases that rise to people's attention, and it sort of goes, yeah, maybe we should really be paying more attention to the rights of children, to child safety. And I 100% agree with what is in the Washington Post, that child safety is absolutely paramount. So you get this rising awareness, and then what happens, instead of the state making legislative changes to fix things, you have that particular bill, which would have made it, a sex offender would have had to show by clear and convincing evidence that it was in the best interest of the child to have unsupervised access. That bill dies in committee. What is the bill that rises and it is now the basis for forming a commission on child custody decisions? It's a bill that was pushed by Fathers' Rights, and I don't have anything against fathers. I do have a real difficult time, though, when you are putting the rights of a parent ahead of the rights of a child, and in particular the protection of a child, and where you have this face-off between parental rights and this expression of presumptive joint custody. So this commission is going to be looking at presumptive joint custody, and it has as a goal how to make child custody orders and modifications fairer, more uniform, equitable, reduce litigation, promote and ensure the children's continued relationships with both parents, maximize the involvement of both parents in the child's life. These are all really good sounding things, but you have to remember back to Joy's slide that what's missing. You know, there's a very big piece here that's missing. It's missing in the commission, it's missing in the commission members, it's missing in their goals and objectives. So you have this large gap. And with this large gap, it's difficult to have that kind of confidence that they're going to be able to distinguish and reconcile the absolute necessity of seeing the best interests of the child, and within that best interest, the safety and protection of the child. And so we're going to have a very interesting face-off this year in Maryland. Actually, it would be next year in 2014. What is this commission going to come up with? They're going to be having hearings. They have not set a hearing in Harris County, Montgomery County. Very interesting. It's, who did they want to hear from? And they also don't appear to know that people in litigation, when they come up and they talk about their cases, they are putting themselves at risk, because there are people who have lost custody because they sought media attention, because they sought to sort of get the word out there. So you're in a real catch-22 situation, and that's only one of the 100 different catch-22s that you find yourself in a case like this. I'm going to wind down, and because we're coming to the end right now, just to say I really appreciate all of you coming here, the mothers and staff. It's really wonderful for us to see you here. And I also want you to pay really close attention right now, because this is October Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and you're going to be seeing quite a number of campaigns out. One of the most obvious and prominent is the No More campaign, No More Excuses. You will see this everywhere. But in these campaigns, again, ask yourself, what is missing? You do not see any of these large national campaigns talking about what we're talking about here. And so there is a tremendous need to develop that awareness. And my hat off to the Safe Child Coalition and to Andrew Willis of the Stop Abuse campaign for having really the sheer determination and guts to bring these issues out to the national awareness and attention. It is so needed. You're bringing in what has been left out, what's missing. The other good thing that's happening now is the growing awareness of narcissistic personality characteristics and sociopathy. You will see more and more in the news about what it's like to be involved with a narcissist or with a sociopath. And when I look at my cases and we're trying to figure out what's going on, we're almost always dealing with somebody who's got a sociopathic disorder. And the crazy thing is that the courts do not see this. The evaluators do not see this. It's very easy for sociopaths and narcissists to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. They are extraordinarily masterful manipulators, cunning liars, remorseless, dedicated, and will present themselves beautifully as a victim, while they will set a goal for destruction. And they have that will to carry out that destruction, and the child is merely a piece of the toolkit, and the court is of the other part of the toolkit. So do look for what's missing these days, and please help us be the voice for these invisible children, these invisible cases. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here. I want to introduce two other people at this point and ask them to stand up, and then I'm going to ask you to put your hands together and thank them for being here and for all they do. Those two people are Connie Valentine here, who's kind enough to spend about an hour on the phone with me every week briefing me, and that's insufferable. Thank you very much, Connie. And also Barry Goldstein here. Movement who does so much to correct this problem. And now I'd like to ask you to once more thank our panel here for being here and for the evidence that they've presented today. Overwhelming evidence that Congress needs to do something, because if nothing else, surely every child has the right to a safe home to grow up in. Every child has the right to a safe home to grow up in. And I'd now like to ask you to put your hands together for all the protective mothers who are here today, who have travelled from across the country to do this. And we're going to hear from the protective mothers right now. Could I ask you to keep your comments down to 1 minute so that we can try and get through as many people as possible? I'm going to start, though, by asking Barry just to say a couple of words.
I wanted to just briefly mention some very new research which we think changes everything and we think leads to 3 simple things that the federal government, that Congress can do that would make an enormous impact. We have a U.S. Department of Justice study by Dan Saunders that found that the standard and required training that judges, lawyers, and evaluators receive does not make them qualified to handle domestic violence cases. And that's a big reason why we're having huge problems. We have wonderful new research based on the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and the CDC. And the short version is that when children witness domestic violence, are exposed to direct violence, have other traumas, they will suffer more illnesses and more injuries as children and later as adults, and their life expectancy will be reduced, so that when the courts are making the mistakes that we've heard about all morning, they are taking the quality and quantity of children's lives Finally, I wanted to mention that we found in a 2-year period news stories about 175 children murdered within 2 years by abusive fathers involved in child custody disputes, the exact kind of case that Harold was talking about. And we followed up, and we went to the judges in the communities where this occurred, and we had a question for them. In response to the tragedy in your community, what reforms have you done to try to better protect children? And we heard from the best judges, because the other judges didn't even want to talk to us. But the answer was nothing, because they assumed that the case in their area was the exception. So I now have 3 things I would like you to do. Number 1, we would like there to be grants to prevent child murders. These grants would go to courts that would use best practices to protect children. And if we use these best practices, that would reduce child murder. We would also be reducing sexual and physical abuse and other things that are so harmful to children. The second thing we'd like you to do is help support the Safe Child Act, which says something very simple, and it's hard to imagine it would be controversial. When we decide on the best interests of the child, the first priority ought to be the safety of children. And again, if we do that, it will make a huge difference. And given that we're here in Congress with all of the problems that we're having, and we have to think about what about the financial, our research shows that we are providing a subsidy of more than $1 trillion a year to tolerate men abusing women. And if we just use best practices that we know that have worked in particular communities and add it to the reforms in custody courts that we need, we could quickly save $500 billion a year. Most of that is in healthcare costs, but also law enforcement and economic productivity. So instead of Congress arguing about whether we should have more taxes or whether we have to cut programs we need, you could be arguing about the opposite. What do we do with this extra $500,000? Finally was mentioned the father initiative. That sounds good. We want to get fathers involved in children's lives. But the way it's been implemented is that they are taking that money and they are helping the worst fathers, fathers who had been in prison on drugs and sexual abuse and physical abuse and all sorts of harmful behaviors. And instead of helping them to get a job to earn money so they might pay child support, which is the theoretical purpose, a lot of that money is being used to help the worst fathers gain custody. And as you heard this morning, the broken system is such that they can be successful. So instead of helping children with this waste of money, we are hurting children. One of the examples of an individual who benefited from this money was John Muhammad. You might know him as the Beltway sniper. Those are the kinds of people that are benefiting from that money, and we think it should be severely cut or eliminated. And again, I just thank everybody for being here, the mothers for telling their painful stories, and maybe now we can start doing something differently. Thank you.
From the floor.
Hi, I'm Lori Henderhan. I'm sorry I had to leave. It's just too painful for me to hear this, and it makes me too angry. Joy, and I knew you know me, my story very well. I was a professor at American University until January when I got fired. We believe that the lawyer for my daughter's father probably paid me at American University a financial contribution to fire me. My daughter was substantiated for rape at the age of 2 by her father. He is a criminal alien from Yugoslavia with a long record of domestic violence and sexual violence. I didn't have a parking ticket to my name. I ran for Congress in Maine. I have a PhD from the London School of Economics funded by 2 State Department grants, and my daughter was given to his sole custody. His lawyer is a man named Michael Waxman, who's the largest corporate real estate owner in all of New England, who is molesting my daughter. Everything that anybody says that this is about training, this is not about training. It's not that the judges don't know better. This is about trafficking of children. Pedophiles need a fresh supply of children, and too many of our judges are pedophiles, and that's how they get their hands on our children. And if I hear one more person say, if we just do a training and these judges will know better, I'm going to scream. I have more evidence of my daughter's abuse than Arm & Hammer has baking soda. It's not about my credibility versus his credibility. He's not a lawyer or a nice man in the community who played Little League. He's a criminal alien from Yugoslavia whose brother is a known child trafficker between Russia and the Balkans. I met him when I worked for the UN because I was UN Regional Gender Advisor for the Balkans. And my daughter I haven't seen in 2 years or spoken to her. And now he mail-ordered a bride from Serbia who divorced him after a year and a half and fled domestic violence just as I did after a year and a half. And he has custody of that 1.5-year-old too, so that he and his lawyer and the judges and the child protection people in the state of Maine can all molest her. And this chart is a chart of my daughter's case, and it is about what is happening in the state of Maine. The head of criminal for the Attorney General in the state of Maine, Justice Department, called my attorney, who used to head child exploitation. He was Deputy Director of Child Exploitation here at DOJ in Washington. He said, "Are you really representing Lori Hanrahan?" And thank God Bob Flores said, "I am." He said, "I've been ordered to silence her because she's creating a hassle for important people in Maine." When the head of the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Maine is ordered to silence me because I'm reporting the crime of my daughter's sex abuse and trafficking, you have a huge problem in this country and nobody's even talking about it. The last thing I'll say, because I know you want to keep it to a minute, the Washington Post did this fantastic editorial on Sunday. What nobody made the connection, on the front page was what David Cameron's doing in England. Huffington Post UK filed a FOIA to find out how much porn was being downloaded, and child porn, in Westminster. Why aren't we doing this here? How much child porn is being downloaded on the Hill? How much child porn is being downloaded by judges? We don't know because nobody's talking about it. We could block the child porn in our ISPs. We don't. April Jones's case in Wales prompted April's law in the UK. April Jones is happening every single day in this country, and it's mostly happening in our family courts with our child protective services. We have a case in Maine right now, Ayla Reynolds, related to my daughter's case. It was child porn snuff, and nobody's talking about it. The national news is running up and covering it, saying it's an aberrant case. It is not. Child porn snuff is the #1 moneymaker right now, and nobody's talking about it. Infant porn is now mainstream. Under 3s are platinum on the child porn market, and my daughter was raped at the age of 2. You can get your hands on a 10-year-old. Anyone can get their hands on a 10-year-old. In order to get your hands on a 2 or 3-year-old, you need family court judges involved, and that's the reality that I'd like people to start talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite any other statements from the floor, perhaps here at the front?
Yes, I'd like to add on to what Lori just said. I'm from the state of Maine as well. Back on March 6, 2011, my son Matthew, he was 14 at the time, he was almost killed by his father. Since then, the criminal trial was conducted through our family law court. And within 3 months of the hearings, custody hearings regarding attempted murder case, he was given sole custody. It is almost 2 years later, and I've yet to hug, kiss, or anything with my children. I haven't seen them. I'm not even allowed to tell them I love them. If you're wondering, why in the state of Maine would a criminal trial such as attempted murder on a child in front of another child, because I have 2 kids, Matthew and Donovan, 14 and 11 at the time. Why was it tried in a custody court? This is why Congress needs to investigate, please. I have not seen them, and every day I live in fear of what happened to your beautiful little prince. because it almost happened to him. They are in his